Okay, so I'm going to present my my week-long unit with three major lessons in it to go with my blended unit, weather and climate. So let's first talk about the analysis of your learner. I had to look up some information on Illinois' report card to figure out some key characteristics of my audience or my learners. My target population for this lesson will be middle school students. They're primarily Caucasian students in my rural community. There's 94.4% of students that were white. 28% of them are considered low-income students, and 19% of those students have an individualized education plan or require some special services and accommodations to help them be the most successful as they possibly can within the learning environment. Technology will assist in differentiation by providing video tutorials, differentiated Google Forms, and reduced test questions. I use lots of these resources numerous times throughout my curriculum in the year. Google Forms is a great resource. It helps you quickly create assessments that provide instantaneous feedback for the students and allows for differentiation of those students with IEPs. I can easily make a copy of a form and take off multiple choice options to make the test a little bit easier, or add images for word banks and such to make sure that all of my students are getting the most appropriate assessment as possible. Technology can also assist with students with disabilities by using audio, visuals, text-to-type features, increased font sizes, and many more for helping those students. So let's get into my first lesson. I did provide a PDF form of this presentation where you can click on the links that I have posted on here, and you can actually check out all the pieces of this unit if you need to look into a different specific part. So you will see part 1 and part 2 for the flipped classroom video. This is the first lesson because it introduces the unit. The students are expected to take notes on their blog pages. So I set up a blog with students in the beginning of the year, and they have to create a page for each unit we do, and all their notes are hosted in that page. At the end of the year, they have this great digital portfolio that shows them all the information they learned through their 6th grade year. It's a great setup. I really enjoy using Blogger, and it is a free resource. So students will copy their notes on their blog page, and each unit definitely has a separate page. And they can go back and look at these notes at any time. They often reference them throughout the unit to help them on labs and other activities. And even when they go on to higher education, 7th, 8th grade, high school, they can still go back to these blog pages. They're still active links, and they can use the information they have on there. So let's talk about the standards. This one's going to kind of hit on every single standard within that weather and climate domain because we're talking about all of the notes of the unit we're going to take on this flipped video classroom. The technology standard that we are going to be hitting on is that students can build their own networks and customize their learning environments. The customizing of the learning environments is 100% through flipped classrooms. Students can pause, rewind, fast forward, and work at their own pace with flipped classrooms, which are awesome. The intent of flipped classrooms is that students will conduct the flipped classroom at home. They will take the notes at home, and then when they get back to class, they can come with questions and have more of a discussion. I sometimes will often allow students to take some notes, even if I'm utilizing a flipped classroom in class due to technology constraints at home. And it works just as effectively because then you don't have students sitting around waiting for others to finish typing to go on to the next slide. They're able to work at their own rate and their own pace, which is great. So let's talk about my objectives for this first lesson. Students will understand and record the difference between weather and climate, understand the layers of the atmosphere, be familiar with weather forecasting and instruments, and understand the human impact on global warming by notating the information on Blogger using the flipped classroom videos successfully. This is an extremely lengthy objective because this is our opening unit where we're talking about all the content of the entire unit by putting it down on notes, and then students will later reference the notes throughout the unit in their various activities and labs and kind of hone in on the specific details of that information. Now, if you look at the ABCD of my objectives, my audience is my students. My behavior that I'm hoping that they will be able to do by the end of the lesson is to understand and to record the information. The conditions that I'm going to be utilizing is Blogger for them to record their notes on. Flipped Classroom Video is utilizing YouTube. And finally, the degree at which I expect them to do this is successfully. They're either going to complete the activity or they're not. There's not necessarily an assigned grade or percentage that goes along with this particular lesson. So procedures of this lesson. First, students will be given a flipped classroom video. They can show the slideshow and there's got a voiceover. My voice talks them through the different lectures. They listen to it, they write it down, and they write it on their blog page. They're asked to bring at least one question back to class that they had after they watched the video, and that will kind of help spur our whole group discussion. This is kind of the key part where we're talking about learner to instructor and learner to learner. We want our learners to participate with each other in a class discussion and also participate with me in a class discussion. And finally, the students' generated questions will guide the class discussion. So possible discussions. Obviously, the discussion is going to vary based on what questions the kids have and bring back. So it's a little bit different every year I do this, but some of the common things that get brought up are the difference between the terms weather and climate. Each layer of the atmosphere has an important job, and what job is each layer? How do humans impact global warming, and what things can we do to counteract that impact? Why is it important we know how to interpret and read weather maps for our everyday life, that real world context? And finally, what can a weather map tell you? How does it help you prepare for your day? Resources. I chose to utilize YouTube and iMovie to make my flipped classroom. I've always used these two resources to make videos. That's exactly what I'm going to utilize for this video. I first will record my video on QuickTime Player on my Mac. Very easy, allows you to screen record and it will take audio at the same time. Then I will import it into iMovie. The reason why I import it to iMovie is because it's very easy to cut, paste, trim, split, etc. For the video, and also you can add title pages and ending credits to it. Very user-friendly. The great thing about exporting it to YouTube is that you can access the video anywhere. You can see it here at school. When they go home, they won't have any kind of problems looking at the YouTube video. If you put your video in Google Drive and you have the students access it that way, you can run into a lot of errors with settings, making sure the share settings are correct so that even if they're not signed into their school Google account, they can still access your video. Blogger, I've been using that for a couple of years now. It's a great electronic portfolio for students to use at all throughout the year and on higher level grades as well. They can go back and revisit it at any point in time. I love that the students get to design their blog to represent themselves and their interests, and it kind of helps me, especially at a middle school setting, connect with my kiddos. Sometimes I only see my kids for 40 minutes a day, so to create that rapport with my kids, it can be difficult at times. So when I visit their page, I'm constantly reminded that, student A really likes dance, or student B really likes soccer, based on their graphics that they have on their blog, their backgrounds, and it just really represents who they are as a person, not just who they are as a student. And finally, Google Forms. Amazing, probably my favorite, easiest to use digital resource yet. It grades itself, which can't get any better than that for teachers, and it provides the kids instant feedback, which I absolutely love. They can go back and instantly figure out what they got wrong, and kids often come up with so many more questions to me about why they missed something than they would if I just graded on paper. They don't tend to ask as many questions. When they figure out immediately right then and there, not 2 or 3 days later, what they missed and why they missed it, it just seems to go over really, really well. So that instantaneous feedback is key. Differentiation opportunities within this lesson. They can work at their own pace when you have flipped classroom notes. They can pause, rewind, fast forward, and rewatch as many times as needed, which is awesome. Their assessment. So I utilize a Google Form exit ticket on this day. So after our class discussion, We discuss all the things that we talked about in the video and that they took notes on the night before. And then as they exit my class that day, they have to take a quick few question form. And I vary what I put on this form depending upon year to year about what, just different things that have come up based on that year's discussion. And they will answer some questions about what they learned about in the video. Again, it's going to provide instantaneous feedback, and I generally always make one of the very last questions of the form a reflection question. Sometimes if it's the very first flipped classroom video I've used all year, I'll ask them how they liked the video method of taking notes. Sometimes I'll ask them to reflect on what they learned from the video, or to tell me one question they have, or I'm going to ask them to reflect in some way so that I'm pulling in that learner to self element. All right, lesson 2. Lesson 2, I think this is probably my favorite lesson ever. I love Google Draw, and it is a free resource that is very easy to use that many teachers don't actually know exists. So I am always promoting Google Draw. I create a graph on Google Draw, and this picture right here at the top shows you the format that they start with. And students have to drag and drop the pictures onto the graph to show what things can be found in each layer. And then they also have to layer the titles of each atmosphere layer and the boundaries that separate them over here. And this bottom picture shows you a picture of a student who completed the activity very well. So they drag over those pictures, and then they just get this awesome, great visual representation of what the atmosphere looks like. Google Draw really helps me meet some of the NGS standards, because many of the NGS standards start with develop a model. Google Draw is a great resource to help kids develop models of different aspects. So this particular one helps develop models of the atmosphere. So in order to correctly put their Google atmosphere graph together, they have to visit these slideshows, and the slideshows will tell them exactly what to do. This picture of this one right here says label the layer, the orange layer, whatever layer that is. Let's say that's the thermosphere. Label the orange layer thermosphere. So then they have to flip over to their Google Draw, and they have to type in it's the thermosphere. So it gives them a little bit of information, then tells them how to create their graph. And by the end, they have this beautiful graph made, and they have all this information they can use back on. And then, of course, I make them do a follow-up conclusion question on a Google form to just go through and make sure to hone in on those key concepts they should have learned while they were creating their graph. I also have this great reading passage that's leveled appropriately. Our science textbook series can be a very tough series to actually understand and comprehend, because it is set for a middle school level, and I have 6th grade, which is the bottom of that middle school level. So sometimes I have to kind of write my own passages to make it a little easier for them to understand. So I provide this passage to help them come up with their captions on their graph, and to just kind of help clarify some other information. So standards for this particular lesson is to ask and clarify questions about global temperatures rising and how it has been a trend and continuing to be a trend. We talk lots about global warming and our impact as humans. My technology standards, students build knowledge by actively exploring real-world issues and problems, hence the global warming. They develop ideas and theories and produce answers and solutions. And then finally, they're creative communicators, because they communicate complex ideas clearly and effectively by creating a variety of digital objects and visualizations and models, and that would be their graph part. They have this great visual at the end of this lesson that shows and demonstrates the different components of the atmosphere.